Search. Search field. Message 2 of 2. David Clippert. It is a plan.
Afternoon all.
Afternoon.
Just checking on you heard.
Loud and very clear.
I'm sitting on a saw stool, Philip, so don't
Make it quick.
make us any longer than it needs to be.
It sounds like you are in a talking through a 44-gallon drum.
Good afternoon, all.
Kia ora, Robert.
I was just checking to see whether I was online.
You're looking great, Robert.
Pardon?
You're looking really good, Robert.
Thank you.
Nice shirt.
I'll let my wife know. You're approved.
More actions. Button. Portrait flip. More actions. Button.
We'll just, I know it's 1 o'clock, but we'll just wait for the Chief Executive and then we'll get underway. Right, we'll open this Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting. I think this is the first Finance, Audit and Risk Committee we've had with Zoom, so welcome everybody. And call for apologies. Do we have any apologies, Karen, that you're aware of?
I have not received any.
Okay. No apologies. And I understand we've got no items of public participation.
None received.
Moves on to our next item of late items. I understand that we have a late item relating to the live-in swimming pool. Can I have a mover that we accept that as a late item, please? Pitihira. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Bernie. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Chairman, I don't know why you can't see me, but that's probably a good thing for the rest of you. I know what I need to do.
Is your video turned on?
I thought it was, yeah.
Oh. Okay, that could. Well, just there you are. Welcome.
That right button.
The right button, yes. Now, in terms of when we'll actually consider that late item, what I want to do is change the order of the meeting. So we'll finish the normal procedural issues, and then we will move on to the Chief Executive's report. I think that's quite an important lead into the rest of the meeting. So we'll do 7.5, Chief Executive's report on page 109, the draft rates remission policy on 113, then the 7.8, the risk management update on page 118, and then we'll consider the late item, and then we'll go back to the health and safety report. Sorry to keep you waiting, Lisa. I thought you were going to be first off the rank, but we'll deal with that in that order. Everyone's happy with that approach. Don't see any objections. Declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any conflict of interest that need to be declared? No. Okay. Confirmation of the meeting of the minutes held on 26th of February. Can I have a mover, please?
Happy to move, Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. Member Brian, do I have a seconder? Thank you, David. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. All right. There are no other announcements. So, Mr. Chief Executive, your report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'll take the report as read. Maybe if I refer to 3.21 onwards first, just giving an indication of some of those things that we have put in place as a result of the situation that we're in at the moment. The key one there being early payments for our suppliers, and we're doing that as best we can, dependent on the receipt of invoices that are coming through. We have a economic and social recovery team within our civil defence structure, and I'll provide further information on how that recovery process works at the council meeting on the 6th of May. We have set up the Financial Resilience Working Party, and that's assisting myself and ultimately council on some of the issues that we might need to deal with at a strategic finance level. And that group has been meeting for the last 3 weeks with its 4th meeting tomorrow. And there's a number of items there, other items there that we've dealt with as a result of going into lockdown at the end of March. So in 3.22, we are looking at some initiatives around bringing some of our capital program forward, and one of those items is going to be discussed later on today around the aquatics maintenance and renewal program. We are looking also at how we might assist the stimulating the economy going forward, and it has been discussed with the councillors around looking at social procurement opportunities, essentially using local suppliers as best we can, and that will become part of our recovery program also. So that the key item that is covered in here is in relation to the rates area, and looking at component parts of that around remission, opportunities or options around postponement, and so that's largely been covered in the report as outlined. I think the key thing to note here is that there's little that we can do at the moment regarding the 4th instalment, apart from working with individuals on a case-by-case basis, working with them, identifying some of the challenges that they might have. We have the ability to look at, on a case-by-case basis, putting an agreed program in place to allow them to, continue, looking at how they might pay those rates going forward. There's ability internally to look at waiving of penalties or reducing of penalties. But I think probably the challenge ahead of us is more around what we might do for next year. This is in the new financial year, and that really is covered in the rates postponement policy. But probably the purpose of this update from myself is to actually have the discussion around that particular area before we go into that consideration of a
I think we've just lost David.
Hmm,
Anyone else see him? Hey,
he's gone.
he's gone. Right.
Vanished.
Okay. So, are there any? It's a bit hard to have asking the chief executive to have some asking questions, but maybe if Doug, if you want to just have any, we'll actually probably deal with the rates postponement separate in the next item. But Doug, do you want to comment on the issue of rates, the fourth instalment? It's sort of been touched on in terms of what David talked about, and just if there's any specific questions for the elected members have any particular questions over that fourth instalment, would be good to deal with that while the chief executive probably reimburses some further. Dave, you want to just comment on that?
Yeah, well, currently we're using our existing rates remissions policy to enable people to smooth out their payments for, so that includes the next instalment. So if people are struggling to pay the next instalment, we can set up a payment plan which effectively will smooth those payments over a long term. Will probably go longer than we normally would, but it also enables us to remit the penalties on as long as they're on that payment plan. So our existing remissions policy is covering us at the moment. I did talk about what we could do for next year. Do you want me to carry on to talk about that or not?
Might be just quite very, very high level.
In terms of penalties for next year, we can actually, in our rates resolution for next year, we can set no penalties, or we can set penalties at a lower rate. And I'm suggesting halving the rate down to 5%. Still high in relation to interest that they'll get at the bank. So it's still an incentive for them to pay, because what I'm worried about is if we don't have a penalty regime at all, people will take advantage of that and use us as a bit like a bank and use us for short-term funds. So what I'm suggesting there is our next rates resolution halve the penalty down from 10 down to 5. And we could also got late instalment penalties. So we've got 4 instalment penalties, but then we've got 2 what we call arrears penalties. Now we could do something with those as well. Like they're set in addition to the instalment penalties, and they're for July and January, which imposes another 10% on balances that are not paid from the previous years. So we could do something with those, either get rid of them altogether or reduce them down. So there's some options for us in the rates resolution. We will need to decide before we actually write the resolution. That resolution is normally adopted by council in its July meeting.
Okay, thanks for that, Doug. Are there any questions for Doug or anyone else on the rates issue? Bernie? Welcome back, David.
sorry about that.
Doug, I just wanted to ask in terms of do people object to paying penalties, or do they pay them relatively easily? And are we actually talking the amount of what sort of revenue are we talking in terms of penalties that we actually gain?
We get about 380,000 odd in penalties a year in terms of income. So it's about 50 to 60,000 depending on installments. Can be as low as can be higher or lower, but it averages out about 40 or 50,000 per instalment. It's usually higher in the December instalment.
Yeah, Wayne?
What costs are there involved in collecting that, Doug?
No cost at all, really. I mean, it's just added to their invoice, and payable the next, so it adds to the total amount due. So there's no real cost involved.
Okay. Any other questions? Sam, and then Christine.
So Doug, can you just confirm? I've actually got two questions. The first question is, can you just confirm then that so the penalties that we have in place are intended as a disincentive, not to pay, disincentive to pay your rates late, rather than covering a finance cost of borrowing to ensure we have that cash flow?
Well, effectively, it's trying to ensure that we do have a cash flow by incentivising people to actually pay their rates on time. That's effectively what it's doing. I mean, we don't really want to impose it, but it's there if we need it.
The second question is just around David Clapton was talking about the case-by-case approach under the current remissions policy in relation to the fourth quarter instalment. I'm just wondering whether there is actually scope for us to take a more standardized response that would allow people to essentially enter into a payment plan that deferred the fourth instalment payment until the September first instalment of next year in September, so as to give people a really easy to access option of dealing with any short-term financial shock they might be suffering from COVID, and operate it on a, as I say, on a standardized and high trust basis. Is that something that could be implemented rather than what appears to be, I guess, more of a case by case, where there probably is quite a bit of officer effort and time involved in actually assessing each application?
Unfortunately, we've got to stick to what our remissions policy actually says. So there's no way that we can actually write off the penalty, the instalment as such. It is case by case, but what we can do is smooth out so they haven't got the big impost of having to pay that amount on that day. We could spread it out over 12, 18 months, even 2 years if need be, to smooth it out for people. But it's got to be in context of our remittance policy, which is a payment plan, and I don't know any other way of setting those up without a individual contact.
Just as a supplementary then, Doug, I mean, I'm kind of thinking of a model similar to like the work subsidy application process that has been rolled out pretty quickly through the COVID situation, where people fill out a pretty easy online form, and essentially all they are saying is, my payment plan is I will pay both installments, but I'll pay my fourth installment in September along with my September installment. And we have a little drop down box that has the different options. Is it because you've lost employment, you've had other financial impacts, whatever? But it would be a very high trust model, and a model that removes the need for officers to go away and do all of that work to actually assess whether the circumstances advanced are actually correct or true. I think it's about focusing on that really short-term financial shock around this fourth instalment.
Can I just interrupt? Just Doug here. I think the problem is, Doug has said, is that at the moment we've got to follow our current remission policy. Now, I'm not disagreeing with what you're proposing, Councillor Jennings. The issue is, legislatively, is we've got to follow our current remission policy. Now, if you want to introduce something like what you're suggesting, we would actually have to amend the remission policy and go up for consultation. So that's unfortunately what the legislation requires us to do.
Well, I guess that's what I'm challenging is that I don't understand how the current policy prevents that. So perhaps if Doug or officers could outline that to me, that would be very useful.
Okay, happy. I think that's a good suggestion. Christine, you had, now just so before we carry on with these questions, it should be really good if we could just actually answer the questions one after the other, rather than go ping pong back to the officers. So just list your questions and then come back to it would be, I think, really helpful in terms of our interesting situation we're currently in. Christine.
Thank you. So is Doug not going to answer Sam's question before I ask my lot?
Oh, I thought he, sorry.
Yes, Sam, I mean, the remissions policy really talks about payment plans. Whether we can introduce a form or not, I really haven't really thought about that. Yeah, look, I don't think as an officer I could make a call on that, to be honest. You might need your fellow councillors to give me a direction on that.
Okay, my turn?
Yep, absolutely, yep.
Okay, so I've got a few questions. So I was on the same page as Sam. I was wondering why we couldn't just use our current remissions policy where we had payment plans with people with no penalties, because we can do that to see them through the time that they needed. So that was a question of mine, why we couldn't use that instead, or continue to use that in the next instalment part as well. My other questions are, okay, so why would someone have to own a property for 182 days? Why the cap should be 1.5 million? Thinking about things like new motels that have been built in town, which I would imagine would have cost more than that. New industrial investment. Thinking in the future, if we had a major drought situation and we wanted to enact this policy as an event for farmers and horticulturalists. So wondering why that cap. Thinking that the criteria seems to exclude residential and commercial landlords. Thinking that really that is a small business in itself, having rentals, and they don't seem to be eligible under this criteria where you have only one property apart from the one that you're applying for.
So, Chris, can I just interrupt there, Christine? Are these about the Chief Executive's current report where we're talking about the remissions, or we're talking about the postponement policy?
Oh, okay, so I'm ahead of myself, am I? So
I'm probably ahead of everyone. You're probably ahead of everyone else, not yourself. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll cut out.
Chairman, I wondered if, going back to Doug's point about the penalties, would it be best to leave the penalties as they are, because that then becomes a negotiating position, as I see it, with the individuals, to be able to say, well, look, if you do this, we will remit the or cancel the penalty. I just thought it might have given a better negotiating position.
Effectively, Brian, we do that for the next instalment anyway, under the current rates resolution. We effectively say that if you go on a payment plan, then we will remit the penalties only if you go on a payment plan, and there has to be, the payment plan has to be done through direct debit. In other words, we control the payments, not direct credit where the ratepayer sets it up. So we set up a direct debit. So we've got a bit of control, and we've also got control over if they don't pay, we get notification fairly quickly. So, I mean, we already use that negotiating ploy. If your remarks relate to next year, whether 5% is enough bargaining to, or we need to leave it at 10%, that would be, a different argument.
Right. I'd definitely leave it at 10%, but.
The debate for council when they come to pass the resolution. Anything further on the Chief Executive's report? Right.
Can I, through you, Chair, can I just come back to the question that Sam is raising around why can't we do what the government is currently doing around the wage subsidy? And there's two things that I think are very, very important to put in context, I suppose, is the reason why the government put that in place was largely because it was identified that a number of businesses were going to have a significant reduction in their income stream over the period of lockdown. And the criteria was set at 30% of your revenue stream being a reduction, and you could claim that subsidy. If we were going to do something with our ratepayers, I'm not quite sure what the criteria would be. Businesses, I think it's straightforward because yes, those people that have applied for a wage subsidy, they've probably been deemed in a hardship from a government perspective already, but they're only a very small portion of our population, of our ratepayer base. The bulk of them are actually individuals, and I'm not quite sure how we would identify the criteria for them to justify doing that trust model that Councillor Jennings has actually identified without some really good follow-up and vetting by the officers to ensure there's just not a carte blanche sort of approach where everyone's saying they're in hardship without that criteria in place and applying for an ability to actually have their rates paid in September or whatever it might be going forward. So I just think we've got to be very careful that the model that's being used by the government is not necessarily the same model that is feasibly possible for council. Now, the other thing is, and that's the challenge that I would argue, is that the government have got a pocket full of money that they can actually sustain themselves in terms of their ability to actually pay out the wage subsidy. We don't. So if we actually have a whole lot of people applying for hardship, we then don't have money coming into our coffers. And the only way that we could actually offset that if we go below our cash holdings is to actually borrow. Because we don't have those cash reserves to actually offset what we might not get by way of rates in either the last quarter of this year or the first quarter of next year. So we've got to, there's some risks associated with your approach, Sam.
Sorry, Nikki.
Through you, Chair, can I just also add something else for the elected members to consider with regards to payment plans? I think what's really important here is to also think about the concept of empowering the community to get back on their feet. And with payment plans, I think what's really important, completely hear Sam's point around making it easy and having something in place, the concept he described where we would defer the fourth quarter and the first instalment of the new financial year to a payment to September. Now, for some people in the community, that may well work. However, for a number of other people in the community, they would be in a better position to pay a smaller amount every week, even if that is a very small amount, over an extended period of time to enable them to not get into a position where, with best of intent, they intended to pay that amount in September, and then for whatever reason, other things happen, and they then find themselves further in a position where they've been unable to make that payment. So the case-by-case basis that council has currently enables people to consider their own situation and then for us to find something that works best for them. Now, that process to date with the people we have worked with, we've been able to come up with arrangements that work for those people. And I would just really encourage elected members to, when you think about payment plans and you think about some of these scenarios, we also need to think about helping people get back on their feet. And the best way to do that in some situations will be to have them paying smaller amounts regularly, so we're not overburdening them down the track.
Thanks, Nikki.
Through you, Chair.
Wayne, sorry, we'll do Wayne and then Joe, sorry.
Given we've got a system which seems to be working well, what is the success rate of collecting those rates through our current system?
But it's working well, mate. Yeah. I mean, there's always some people that will, will go on to a payment plan and then stop payments for whatever reason. So you've always got those, and you probably find that in your own business. There's some people that just don't stick to the plan. But I think the people are coming in now are going to be genuine cases where they really have got a hardship issue, and they're looking at ways of getting out of that. So I think it'll be quite successful, because they're not the normal. There won't be the normal hardcore debt.
Joe?
And mine's of a similar vein to Councillor Bishop's question. Mine was in point 319 in the Chief Executive's report. It refers to using normal debt collection processes. I just wondered how successful and how often do you have to engage with debt collectors? Is that a big part of managing the rates debtors, or how does that work?
Yeah, we send out reminder letters on each instalment, saying that, hey, you have forgotten your instalment, and pay up. But the major debt collection effort happens at the end of every financial year, where we send out people that haven't paid for a whole year, the previous year. We sent them to our Debt Management Central Debt Collecting Agency, and they can make calls on mortgagees, of course, because rates, most people don't realise that rates actually rank ahead of a mortgage. So if a ratepayer's got a mortgage, then we'll actually claim the rates off the mortgagee. And there's a process in the Act to do that. You can't get the money until November, but at least you can get it.
Any more questions on the Chief Executive's report? Go. Ross Finnegan. Mic on.
Just trying to unmute. I've just unmuted. Listen, thanks. I certainly support Wayne and Joe's, what they're talking about, what Doug's mentioned around the ability for council to work with people who are in hardship and need assistance in terms of their rates. And I certainly take on board what David said, because it was something that was floating in my mind, is that we still have a business to run, and that business needs to be funded. A carte blanche approach doesn't work for me, because there are people out there that won't need assistance, that might particularly take it up if it's offered. So if people have to come in and make that approach, I'm sure council can make it as easy as possible. And I know a number of people over time that have come to me in terms of rates difficulty, and I've put them on the council officers, and they've dealt with that really well by making payment plans that these people can afford and get through. And I see this as no different. So the question I will certainly support our council officers that work with people that need assistance, and perhaps a waiving of penalties under those circumstances where they have made that approach. I would totally support. The question I've got from David is does our rates office have the capability to scale up and provide resource to those requests that might come in time? Just some guidance around that would be good.
Best to come from Nikki on that one, Ross.
Thank you.
And Doug, I am sure, will respond if I have missed anything. One of the things that I think we have done in more recent times is a lot of cross-training within the finance team, which enables a number of people to assist in this space. And keeping in mind, again, as it's on a case-by-case basis, there will be in some cases where the requests are just for information or for us to provide options, and they may not wish to at that point proceed, which means we have a number of people in the team who can assist with providing information and guidance. And then we have the people who essentially are putting the payment arrangements or plans in place. At this stage, based on the numbers that have been coming through and the fact that for a number of people there's all different triggers and trigger points in both the fourth instalment and thinking forward to the first instalment and thereafter of the new financial year, we are managing to respond to that and I guess respond to that workload and scale up as and when required. Look, if the entire ratepayer database was to contact us on one day and all wish to put those payment arrangements in place on that same day, that would be a totally different scenario. But I think at this stage, I am comfortable that we are managing the demand, and I think the basis of the fact that people are making these decisions at all different points allows us to respond to the peaks and troughs. But Doug, if you wish to add anything, please feel free.
I think you're right, Nikki, in terms of the resource at the moment, that there could be a spike when the next instalment goes out in the next couple of weeks. But there's at least, there's 2 rates officers plus Jeff Paulin plus probably one other. So we'll probably get 4 people that we could throw at this on for a short term without too much problem. So we could probably got 4 people that could handle the calls, at the moment. Whereas on a normal circumstance, it would be down to just the 2 rates officers.
I think the only other aspect to add is that we're not waiting necessarily to have the 4th instalment go out and then expect to promote this with our ratepayers. We've been quite proactive to start engagement with people early, where we have been putting information up onto our website, where we've been talking to all of the contacts, whether it's through our check-ins, welfare check-ins with people through some of the other means, where we've got people talking to someone about possibly a credit on a swim school situation, and it gets raised about rates. We're able to direct people into support from the team now. So those conversations have almost been happening from lockdown, and they will continue to occur. We will, however, include further information in the rates instalment that will go out in May, which again will be prompting the contact with our team, and that we're there to help. So I think, again, we're trying to manage that this is something we could be considering right now, rather than waiting for the 4th instalment to go out.
Thank you, Nikki. Any other questions? All right, if no further questions on the Chief Executive's report, can I have a mover for the recommendation?
Happy to move, Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Todd. All right, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Right, next item is the draft rates postponement policy, which is a different animal than remission policies. And I'm going to steal some of Doug's thunder here a little bit. And I think there's a subtlety in the rates legislation that council needs to be aware of, and that if a applicant meets all the criteria as set out in a rates postponement policy, those rates must be postponed. Whereas a remission policy, council may remit the rates, including penalties. So it's actually quite a subtle difference. So you've got to make sure that you actually have reasonably robust criteria within your postponement policy. Doug, do you want to add anything else to it before we open up for questions?
Yeah, that point that the chair just raised is paragraph 3.4. You'll see there that under section 87 of the Rating Act, a local authority must postpone requirement to pay rates. So that's where that legislation is driven from. Yeah, well, I'm interested to. There are some. Yeah, Christine's raised some issues regarding some constraints about who will be eligible. So that I'd like to get the feel from the councillors about whether those eligibility restraints of something that we're willing to live with, or we want that to remain in there.
And Doug, can I also just say too, this committee can't actually adopt the policy. It's got to be adopted by council and then go out for consultation. So this is basically council's first cut at it, and we can send the chief executive and his merry team out to do some more work on it and bring it back to council for the council meeting on the 2nd of May. Now, Christine, I think you led the charge with your list of questions, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so do you want me to start from the beginning again, or have you got those?
Have you got them, Dave? All the questions
they were around those constraints, and
yes.
The constraint about the valuation and the constraint about the number of days of ownership when they, Christine, those are two.
Yep, there's a few more questions than what I sort of talked to you about earlier too. So I think this is a really good starting point, but it's important that we actually question it and make sure that before it comes out in a couple of weeks, and we actually ratify that it goes out for consultation, that we've hopefully tweaked a few things that we might have decided need tweaking. So yeah, there was the cap, the 1.5 million cap, just thinking about industrial and commercial builds, fairly new ones, and the potential in the future for maybe agricultural and horticultural people to need to tap into this if there's an event that affects them, that we decide is an event. Wondering how, just can you confirm how long you would expect this to go for? So how many rates, installments would it cover? Is it just 2, or would it possibly be for longer than 2 installments? And if so, the implications for that, for people to being able to pay back their rates. And the eligibility, I noticed in the residential one, it talks about possibly, it's got either proving that you're unemployed, and then it says, or having received payment from an employer under the government support package. And I'm just concerned about that, because an awful lot of workers will have received payments for an employer support package, may still have been getting their full wage, and may in the future be getting their full wage. So just making sure that our criteria is really tight, and that the people that are applying really do need to apply. Thank you.
The policy envisages that the requirement to postpone will be for a year. If you look at the very bottom of the postponement, rates will remain postponed until A, the ratepayer ceases to be the owner. In other words, they sell their property, and what happens then is that the postponed rates would automatically be paid at that point, or 365 days, which is a year, or a date that is specified by council, so you can actually set up your own. And that was the reason behind the resolution. So as I see it, we need to do a resolution over and above, if we do adopt the postponement policy, the resolution that comes in underneath that, that's what firms up the criteria in terms of how officers will apply the postponement policy. Now, in terms of payment by employers under the government support package, that is where their rates, their income would drop down to the the figure now, it's $575 or whatever it is per week.
85.
500 what?
85.
585. So that's a situation where, as I said, they would have been made redundant, and the employer effectively is just handing on what the government are giving them. And it's so it's not the full wage at all, Christine, it's just the 585. But that's the way I see it as working anyway.
Okay, so I read it differently, Doug, because some people may have had that drop down for a month or two, but as that business picks up in the next financial year, those people may be back on their full wage. So I just felt that needed to be tightened. And that one about, well, what else did I say? Oh, okay, the B, that 365 days, it actually says 365 days after the council resolves the effects are no longer felt in the community. So if this COVID effect goes on for 2 or 3 years, under that, I could see somebody having a rates postponement for 2 or 3 years, and the ability to pay back after that could be really difficult. So it's just tightening things up so they're a lot clearer, I thought.
Chairman, if I could just support Christine too, because businesses that I'm involved with, in 2 cases, they've topped up to 100%, and all the other cases, they've topped up to 80%. And many staff have said that their actual expenditure has gone down through lockdown so that they haven't suffered unduly at 80%. So I think it's an area I marked as being, you know, how we make that judgment is going to be quite tricky, I think.
I concur that we don't actually have the ability to, unlike central government, to identify what people actually earn. So that's a really hard criteria for council to establish. So I look forward to Doug, when he brings it back to council, how he actually, and he's smiling at me to say it sounds like a phone call's in the wing, about how we actually redefine that, because that's actually quite hard.
Sounds like a hospital pass to me.
Yeah, well, maybe we can talk about it, right? Bouncing ideas around, I think, and that's the hard bit for councils. Unlike government, we can't see what anybody earns. We don't actually, if someone applies for a subsidy from central government, the government have the ability to actually inquire as to their income. We don't have that ability, and that's I think a deliberate ploy by central government, but it also comes, we've got to be careful on how we have our policies in place. Do we have any comments, Brian?
I wonder if the resolution shouldn't be changed to that the Horowhenua District Council adopts a draft rates postponement policy, rather than, because there's so many things that need to be fine-tuned in this policy.
I agree with you. I think one of the things the resolution should be is actually that we recommend to council that we do have a postponement policy, and that council consider that further on the 6th of May, which gives the ability for council to consider, or staff and council to consider all the further facts before it adopts for consultation. But I just want to go back to a comment that Christine made. One of the challenges we're going to have with COVID and the economic impacts is we're only starting to see the effects now. We don't know how long the effects are going to go for, and we don't know when we're going to see the, if I remember back to 2008, they always used to talk about the grassroots or the green shoots of recovery for New Zealand, and I think that's probably why we're recommending that it's a year after council decides the event is over, because then council can actually say, okay, we think we're actually on a recovery plan, therefore anyone with a postponement policy has got then a further 12 months to pay all their rates back. But I also understand, now correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, someone who's had their rates postponed doesn't mean to say that their entire rates are going to be postponed. Is that what that's the policy allows for that? So yes, you might actually have a rates bill of $1,000, and all you can afford is $1,000, and all you can afford is $100 until you get back on your feet. So it would only be postponing $900. Is that correct, Doug?
Yeah, I don't think there's any set amount that you need to postpone. I mean, it comes back to almost a case-by-case basis. Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I mean, I've never actually run a postponement policy in my whole career, to be honest. It's the first time for me too. But I understand that that is what you can do. I mean, the postponement can be any amount that you wish to do. A lot of postponements, elsewhere in the country go through till death, especially for older people. And the estate effectively pays the rates at the time of a person dying. I don't think we need to get into that territory here, but that's the case elsewhere in the country.
Chairman, just for my education, isn't the fact that we negotiate a payment plan a postponement policy?
Yes and no. What we're doing is we're actually, as part of that postponement, well, postponement is probably a literal interpretation of it, but not in terms of the actual remission policy. Because what we're doing is the people that are still making payment under a payment plan, all we're doing is we're remitting the penalties for late payment. Now, there's a subtlety within the rates legislation. You can only collect rates up until 6 years after they have been set, unless there has been a postponement. So the minute you've actually postponed your rates under a postponement plan, then that 6 years actually stops. It goes, so you could actually postpone someone's rates for 100 years if you wanted to, and they'd still be obliged to pay those rates. Probably doesn't answer your question, but I think
the way I see it is that with the remissions of the penalty or the payment plans, we're actually saying that you still owe the full amount of rates. With a postponement, we're saying we're going to reduce temporarily the amount of money that you owe, and then we could also do a payment plan based on that lower figure, and then increase it when the postponed rates come back as a debt.
Christine?
So what do you think the potential could be down the track for some of these businesses becoming bad debtors? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that if we get a lot of people wanting or being eligible for rates postponements, and we have to debt fund the money so that we continue with our normal levels of service and programs, could that have an impact on our debt ceilings and our benchmarks that we have to meet?
Yes, it will do. It could create a short term, definitely create a cash flow issue, which could impact on debt depending on how. It all comes down to how many people apply, and that's the unknown question. I don't know how well people will pick it up or want to pick it up.
Can I comment here too? You haven't answered the question, Doug, about bad debts. But I'll just remind the committee that rates take basically first charge over any proceeds from a property after the official S&E or the agent selling the property. So what happens is if a property is sold, then there are fees and charges associated with the sale of the property. Then council then gets its first rates ahead of any mortgage or any other statutory land charge. So we're the first cab off the rank. But Doug's right, there is a significant cash flow issue if we get substantial number of people applying for postponement. And I think that might answer some of your questions about why there was relatively high degree of criteria of who could actually apply. It was I'll put my hand up here. This was a plagiarised policy from another council, and that council says we're actually focusing on small businesses and small households. So that was their focus. Now this council can actually change its direction and make those criteria wider, but understanding if you make it wider, then there'll be more people applying.
So, Chairman, being a devil's advocate on this, what would be the downside of not having the policy at all?
You want me to answer that, Doug? Basically, you can't legally postpone rates unless you have a policy. So that's, so if someone came...
We don't postpone rates.
You can't, that's right. So the rates, all you could do is the person, you'd have to then use your current remission policies over payment over with a rates payment plan to remit penalties, otherwise they are legally due and enforceable.
The impact, as I said, Brian, will be on the people that can't get the postponement. Is this going to increase the stress on small businesses and people have been made redundant or whatever? So it really comes down to social welfare issue as opposed to as much as anything else.
Christine, you got a comment?
I was going to say that if we didn't have an event like this and businesses or people had adverse circumstances, their alternative would be to go to their bank. Would that be right?
Correct. Any more questions on this item?
Can I just ask one, Mr. Chair, because I don't know the answer. If an individual applies for the postponement, are they still then eligible for the government rates rebate?
Yes. Yes, they
on
are.
On what basis?
The provision of the Rates Rebate Act. There's a specific clause that allows it.
But how would that then be received by the individual? Because, you know, we would, okay, there's some mechanics there, because if it was deferred for 12 months, I'm not quite sure how we could receive the rates rebate coming through our system if there's going to be no payment made by the individual.
No, the Rates Rebate Act actually was amended to allow this back in about 2004 or 5. So even if the rates have been postponed, they're technically still legally due, and technically, as far as the Rate Rebate Act is concerned, they are technically have been paid. There's a provision within the Rates Rebate Act. Trust me, David, I actually put it through Parliament.
Yeah. Okay, but so we would receive the funds and offset it against the, or who would receive the funds? Sorry.
We would receive the funds in that case, and we would then offset that against the postponed amount.
Okay.
So that needs to be in the policy. So if you make that tweak, Doug.
Yeah.
That one before.
Yeah. Look, and look, before we finish this, I think we've also got to ask ourselves the question as a council: what is the purpose of actually having the postponement policy? You know, is it to actually help those people that are going to go through hardship over the next little while? And if that's the case, that's fine. Like Mr. Jackson, I'll play the devil's advocate here. It'd be interesting to see what the telcos, the power companies and the insurance companies are going to do in the same context to actually help businesses get through this situation. And I'm sure they're not going to postpone power bills for 12 months. I'm pretty sure they'll probably, if no payment, they'll disconnect the power.
I was reading something this morning. I saw the headline, David. I actually haven't read in detail about telcos and power companies. There's provisions being made, I think, in Parliament that they can't actually disconnect. But I'm not sure on that at the moment. It was only announced this morning. Councillor Jennings, you had a question?
Yeah, just one question around paragraph 4.6 of the paper, which is around timing. And the question really is, working back from the September instalment for the next rating year, I just didn't understand why there is such a need to immediately push for a decision at the 6th May council meeting. So it's just a question around timing, I guess, and assuming that we didn't have it adopted at the July meeting, presumably there's still opportunity to do that in an August meeting, or in the worst case scenario, just the current payment plan option still exists. for the first instalment of the next rating year.
I was trying to work out how long the process takes, because the 30 days consultation period is only the beginning of that. Then you have to collate all the submissions, and then the council need to hear those submissions. That normally is about a 2-month process, has done in the past anyway. So that would take you through to the end of June at the very, very earliest. And effectively, we adopt our rates resolution in the first council meeting of July. So I was sort of hoping to get all that stuff sort of done at the same time.
To answer your question, Sam, thank you. Any other questions? So if we just now go to the resolution, or the recommendation, happy that 2.1, 2.2 is okay. In 2.3, Karen, I think needs to be altered to the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee recommends to the Horowhenua District Council that it considers the adoption of a rates postponement policy for consultation, subject to further feedback from elected members and staff. So what we're saying is, yes, this council, what we're saying by that is that this council wants a postponement policy and it will be brought back to council for further adoption for consultation. So that's, I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? That David, thank you, David. Any further discussion on the resolution?
Mr. Chair, how do you propose the feedback through to, we're only talking a week here between this meeting and the next. The agenda effectively needs to go out tomorrow.
Well, what I'm seeing is that your inbox will be flooded with suggestions this afternoon, and then you actually finalise the policy to go on the agenda. And then it was also, I mean, that doesn't preclude further discussion at the council meeting and amendment. Ross Brannigan had a comment, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just probably a question for Doug and David, really, and probably yourself. Is there a possibility, because I mean, we're crystal ball gazing to an extent. I think we all understand this is going to hit pretty hard economically. It's going to be a lot of pain out there. So we're talking about a rate postponement policy. I guess a bit of crystal ball gazing that it's going to be required, and someone will utilise it. Is it before the next meeting? And given it's only a week, I wonder if it's possible to get a report through council, perhaps from the Horowhenua New Zealand Trust, around their views around the economic impacts of the Horowhenua, and perhaps a little bit of crystal ball gazing from them. It'd be just nice to get a feel from the business community, because individually I'm sure we don't have all the answers. So just floating out to see if that's possible.
Mr. Chief Executive.
Look, it's not impossible. We've actually had a first cut of that information coming through from the Horowhenua New Zealand Trust about 3 weeks ago. They gave us an indication of what they thought the impact might be by sector in terms of job numbers and things like that. We can probably extrapolate that out to make an assessment, based on some assumptions on the number of people that might apply for this postponement policy relative to those figures. Look, early indications are that the impact in the Horowhenua, and it will be dramatic, don't get me wrong, but it won't be as dramatic as the other parts of the country. Just as an example, the MSD figures that have come out just recently, the national average increase in job, actually it's not just job seeker benefits, it's MSD benefits, is up about 34%. In the Horowhenua or in this region, it's only 23%. It just sort of shows you that the impacts in different parts of the country are going to vary. But what we can do is we can do some sort of assessment, high-level assessment, Ross, just to give you an indication. It'll be done verbally next Wednesday. We won't have it in time to go out with the council agenda tomorrow.
Chairman, is there any government or WINS support for ratepayers? I don't know at all whether there is, but can people get support for paying their rates?
I'm not an expert on it, but I understand, and I can stand to be corrected, rates do actually come under the accommodation supplement for exceptional circumstances, just like rent does. But there's also, of course, the rate subsidy as well. So, but the rate subsidy is based on 12 months income rather than a specific cash flow issue. Wayne.
Do we know if the sector New Zealand-wide is lobbying government for some sort of policy to come through from central government? We're all going to be doing this individually, and there's no council in New Zealand who isn't going to be affected to some degree. And I've asked it at the Resilience Working Party a few weeks ago, but I don't know if we've heard any word whether LGNZ are lobbying government for some sort of relief policy.
The answer to that is yes, they are. We've actually forwarded something down to that it's the local government response unit, I think it's called, particularly around the rates rebate and trying to almost automate that. So there's a correlation between the database that MSD might have and the property databases that councils might have. We haven't had any indication, I don't think, around any guidance on the postponement policy framework. But we are Nikki's on a Zoom meeting tomorrow with the chief executives of other councils, and I'm sure that's a question that we can ask at that time.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on the resolution? So I have moved. I actually don't have we've got a seconder. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. All right, thank you for that. Next item is the Horowhenua District Council's COVID-19 Risk Management Update, page 118. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. So I guess I'm going to take it as the update as read. Basically, the context of it is essentially that this is the risk matrix that the incident management team has implemented in our initial response to the COVID crisis, if you like. So we have we've actually implemented this separately to the organisational risk register used by council, and I'm willing to take any questions from the committee members on either the update or the content of the risk matrix itself.
Are there any questions? Done a good job, Steve. No questions.
Yeah, well done.
All right. So therefore, there's no questions. Can I have a mover for the recommendation? Thank you, Victoria. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, David. Oh, sorry, Wayne. Didn't see you in the corner there. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those against? Carried. All right. Thank you.
Can I just note, Mr. Chair, and I know this is a very, very formal meeting. Steve's just gone, but pretty cool that he's been here for a 30-second stint and he's put his tie on for the meeting. So well done to Steve. I can't say the same about Mr. Bishop, but that's all right.
Yeah, how long did it take him to put his tie on? That's the only comment I have. Right. Next item is our late item on the aquatic brief, the planned maintenance window. Nikki, thank you for this, I think.
Good afternoon again, everyone. So look, I am really conscious that the elected members have received prior correspondence on this matter prior to this late item being tabled to the meeting, and I will take the report as read, but I would just like the opportunity to highlight a couple of key points, please. So this particular paper is essentially presenting the elected members via the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee with some information that we have been working on within the Community Facilities team, focused specifically on aquatics in response to our planning for the alert levels within the government framework. So the elected members and community will be aware that during level 4, we were in the lockdown, and we did not have staff within those facilities in any capacity other than specific checks which were carried out at aquatics on a daily basis to ensure that the plant and operation was running safely and as normal. For us to then plan to alert level 3 and thereafter thinking about alert level 2 and alert level 1, we casted our minds to a range of scenarios, and in aquatics in particular, why this is quite important is that we, particularly in Levin, only have 2 public holidays where we actually close that facility. So it is a facility that largely is open all year round. It provides us with very short windows to do any minor maintenance or renewals, and for any form of major maintenance or renewals, we have to plan a shutdown. And in those cases in the past, we have largely had that carried out when we undertook the Levin Aquatic Centre redevelopment a number of years ago now. So we proposed a scenario, and that is included in this paper, to take, I guess, the opportunity that the alert level 3 period provides, and consider for council to look at whether we could look at an extended window of time, understanding the community impact to that facility continuing to be closed for an extended period of time should we move down in the alert levels and be enabled to open. But essentially to carry out some minor and major maintenance work that otherwise would be very difficult to do, and in our view as officers, provides an ideal opportunity. This is work that we had budgeted in the Levin and Foxton Aquatic Centre through the draft annual plan process. So it's proposed for the new financial year starting 1 July. And largely that work is work which would be carried out by local contractors under the preferred supplier arrangements we already have in place with aquatics. And we would like, I guess, you to consider with this late item the scenario we've presented, and essentially the recommendation for the emergency committee to consider approving for that budget to be brought forward to enable that work to be completed in a 4-week window commencing immediately. That's all from me. I am happy to take questions.
Chairman, just a procedural matter for me is what is to stop us making that decision now rather than it going to the emergency committee?
Mr. Clapperton?
Look, I think just from a process perspective, the Finance Committee actually has, Finance, Audit and Risk Committee has no delegated authority. The delegation sits with the council, or in the recommended case that we've got is the emergency committee. At the same time, though, the committee, the FAR committee, which is essentially made up of council anyway, can certainly give an indication to the emergency committee that they have their support to actually resolve to approve the recommendation.
Wayne.
Thank you. I just want to put forward, rather than having a resolution whether we accept this or whether we don't, reading through the report, I was interested to see that there is some future work in 2022 around repairing the gangland beams or the glulam beams, and also inspections in the wood tech linings on the ceiling and the vapour barrier that they sit above. Now, I'm imagining that that's a pretty extensive piece of work to recoat those portals, those glulam beams. And I'm just thinking, when we lent sort of initial support to this notion, I wasn't aware that we would have in the very near future another window of opportunity to do some scheduled maintenance, budgeted maintenance. And certainly within this environment of trying to be prudent with the spend that we've got at the moment, sweating assets and potential deferrals, if we could look at the options, please, Nikki, of what we could do in and around the time when we have to redo those beams and look at the ceiling. We've got a whole lot longer lead window that we could do a lot of work potentially over a similar sort of a period, rather than rushing into this one and maybe being caught out with some supplies or having to further extend the close down. Just some feedback on that, please.
I will respond to the best of my knowledge, and handily I also have Brent Harvey on the Zoom call, who will possibly be able to add to anything that I am unable to cover. So the information that Wayne is referring to was in the full briefing paper that went to councillors, and therefore the two items that Wayne's just referred to, if you are trying to find those in that late paper, are not visible, because we essentially removed those items where we were not confident that we could complete those definitely in a 4-week window. But I would proviso that was on the basis that we were carrying out all of the things that you see featured in the late report and those two items, and hence the challenge was for us to confidently see that we could do those all within a 4-week window, because there would be an order in which you would need to carry that out. So keep in mind, at the moment, we currently have a full main pool in the Live-In Aquatic Centre. In order to carry out some of those works, you would need to make sure we've drained that and appropriately prepared to be able to undertake some of those more significant works. So Wayne is correct, that budget is budgeted later in the 2020 year. And absolutely those more major works could be considered, and they are significant, and we would, as officers, and I'm sure Brent would support this, they are items we would have obviously seen as a good investment to carry out in this window. But we wouldn't have the same confidence that we could complete those without extending that shutdown period if it was alongside the other work that is highlighted. And Brent, if there's anything I haven't covered, please add now.
No, I think you've covered everything up there, Nikki, so I really don't have a lot to add at this point.
David?
Proposed works, we're looking at a shortfall of around $21,000. Has any thought been given as to funding sources for that shortfall?
I'm assuming you're expecting me to answer that.
Absolutely.
Look, and Doug may be able to add to this as well. This will likely be quite similar to the scenario that we had recently as elected members with the hydroslide situation. So you'll be aware that aquatics obviously is a targeted rate. Now, within that list of projects that's been outlined, there's obviously individual costs to each of those, and some of those are renewal, whereas some of those are maintenance or would be classed as touch-up works as well. So we would need to basically go through and define the renewal components that we would all do within the budget that is associated to renewals. And then Doug, I'm assuming with the shortfall, it would work in the exact same way in which the hydro slide would work. But can you just confirm that to be the case?
Yes, it's the case. We end up loan funding when we run out of money from in a particular activity, especially if it's got a targeted rate attached to it, because we can only use the money from that targeted rate for that activity. So we'd use up all available cash for that activity and then loan fund the rest.
Todd?
Yeah, good afternoon. This is directed mainly at you, Nikki. Thank you very much for your fast report on what we asked last week about the Aquatic Centre. But getting back to Wayne's, which I missed, so well done, Mr. Bishop. If what Wayne's suggesting is that we've got some major work to be done on the pool in 2022, which from what I've just heard now is we're probably going to have to drain the pool anyway, which is what effectively wanted to try and do while this COVID-19 was on. The resealing of the pool, which we were talking about doing in 21, which we were hoping to bring forward, would it make any difference if we delayed it and put it back to 22? So when they are draining the pool, all those works can be done at once in one hit, or is there a time frame that we have to reseal the pool in a certain frame or not?
Brent, can I get you to cover that one from the technical side of things, please?
Sure, no problem. The sealant in the pool, I guess the driver behind that one at the moment is there is a piece of sealant that has come out of the main pool effectively. So it is I guess a priority item that needs to happen. So again, thinking about draining the pool and doing all the work together, I would be inclined to concentrate on the sealant now if we're able to, and then push potentially the other work on the roof levels back if we're able to into a later financial year to give us more time between closures effectively. The sealant work needs time. It needs 10 days to properly cure. It needs time to set, and the pool needs to be dry to do it. So there are difficulties with work going in over the top if we're trying to program too many things in the main pool at the same time.
Okay, so Brett, my next question then would be, if we did have to reseal the pool either this year or early next year, how urgent, obviously you've told me how urgent it is to reseal the pool, which I totally understand, thank you. But the ceilings that we're talking about and the beams that you're talking about, is that essentially have to be done in 2022, or can that be pushed back a year or so as well, mate?
No, we could probably assess that and look to push that back a year, so it does extend the time between closures. In the next, we've got condition assessments done on all facilities for the next 10 years. So from my preference, the longer we can go between closures, the better. And we'd look to plan that effectively as best we could.
Thank you, Brett. Cheers, mate.
Okay. Ross, did you have a question? Oh, Pretty Harrow.
Yeah, that difference of 21,000 that was mentioned earlier, of the list of maintenance, there's one on showers, men's and women's, something that we upgraded not too long ago, and the price tag is effectively the same. So is that something we can defer, or is it a priority like the resealing?
Can I just answer that, not in terms of those showers, and I don't know the detail. Look, the materiality of the $21,000 is very, very small. You know, if we have to cover that just through our internal allocation of funding, you know, essentially it's only $630 that we might incur by way of debt servicing over the next 12 months. It's neither here nor there. It's about 3 cents per ratepayer on the basis of a targeted rate. Look, if we were talking about, $750,000, quite different. But in terms of the $21,000, it's not material.
Did that answer your question? I take a smile as a yes. Right, any other questions? Don't see any other questions. So going back to the recommendation. So we're going to receive this report. It's not significant, and we're then recommending to the emergency committee that will meet after this, I would imagine, to make a final decision. That's my understanding of the recommendation. So can I have a mover for that, please? Thank you, David. Do I have a seconder? I'll take Ross as a seconder. Thank you. Any discussion on the recommendation? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? One against. Thank you, Wayne. Do I have any? All right. The matter is carried. Next item is our quarterly. Now, I'm probably going to, after this item, I'll take a 10-minute, we'll be going an hour and a half. We'll probably take a 10-minute break after the health and safety update before the projects. Welcome to the meeting, Tanya.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Hello to all the elected members, Mayor and my fellow council. I take the report as read, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Yeah. Are there any questions on the report? Ross, and then Victoria.
Yeah, sorry, it's not a question again, Mr. Chair. It's a comment towards Tanya. And I made the comment before. I just want to reiterate the changes in the reporting for health and safety since a few months ago when we had some discussions around it. I think it's just very easy to read, very easy to understand, and gives a really good indication of across the organisation what we're doing around health and safety. So I just want to acknowledge your work you've done, Tanya. You've really, in my view, done it very well. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor.
Victoria?
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, lots of detail in there. It was a really good read. I just had a question on page 11 because I know that a couple of elected members were contacted in regards to the elderly lady who fell at Te Awaho. And my question was, after reading through that and having a discussion with the person, it was more about the colour blending of the steps when you are have issues with your vision. It all looks the same, like there's no line defining where the concrete and the floor, begin and end. But great to see that you're doing the handrails and the signage. And I just wanted to know, did anyone follow up with a phone call to that lady?
I can't answer that. Is Brent still on? I can certainly, I can't answer that directly, but I can certainly find out for you. And I would think yes, but I will I'm just writing down here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, if you could just follow that up,
that's fine.
Great. Thanks, Tanya.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Councillor.
You want a second bite at the cherry, do you, Ross?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. And this is not a comment; it's a question. So I'm
you're forgiven once.
Yeah. Tanya, just in relation to the aggressive, abusive behaviour by towards the staff members that you listed there, are we considering, or are we doing, or are we at least considering a trespass against people that behave like that in terms of protecting our staff? Because I think it's really important that we do that. So just your thoughts,
yes,
please?
definitely. There have been cases in the past where trespass have been issued. It's usually when it has been escalated to security or police called in. At this instance, it was quite aggressive to the lady, and then he just finished his transaction and moved away. It didn't carry on, and she was able to then get support and realise that she probably should have stopped a lot sooner. She, you know, through the training that she has had, she recognised later of the behaviour that was coming at her. So that was how it was reported. There have been cases of trespass in the facilities, libraries especially, and they are issued through the police with the managers, and they are definitely on the people safe reporting. There haven't been any recently within my tenure for 6 months now.
Any further questions? Todd?
Yeah, good afternoon. Like Ross, yeah, I love your report. Very easy to read, very detailed. I really enjoy reading them. Ross actually beat me to the start there a little bit. I also have concerns over where a couple of our staff members, or one of them was assaulted at near the skateboard park there in town. And I noticed in part of the response was that the police were called, they found the offender, and we decided not to press any charges and let it go. Is that sending the right message, that people can just go out there and throw punches at our staff and we don't follow it up by charging them? Or is that an individual thing that it's not up to us to charge, it's up to the employee?
It was the employee that asked the police not to press a charge. They discussed the person that was involved, and I think there was some knowledge of the person, and he just wanted him to be talked to by the police and not to press a charge.
Do we have any power to make that a policy, that if any of our staff are threatened, or that we prosecute?
I'm not sure I can answer that. David, perhaps?
Look, we have a fairly a low tolerance for any abuse or sort of physical action against staff members. We have delegated to the managers that are on site to issue trespass notices. It doesn't actually have to come through me. They can issue those. What we have to consider is on a case-by-case basis the circumstance. And in this case here, yes, an indication was made by the employee, but I'm happy to probably take this back to our people and capability team, and which Tanya is part of, just to look to see whether we need to have a review of the guidelines back to staff in situations like this. But look, generally, you know, we've highlighted it here, and it's great that Tanya's actually done that. It is the exception rather than the rule. We have very, very few cases of this nature, but I take on board the councillor's concern around the safety of our staff and the consequence, I suppose, of those people that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing with our staff in mind. And I'm happy to actually take that back, and we can review that as part of the current guidelines and policies that we have in place for our staff in situations like this.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Can you hear it?
So I've got two questions. The first one is on page 14. Under problem analysis, it talks about overlapping responsibilities with the contractors. And then in that last column where it talks about, because this structure is pretty big, a cushion for what, you know, how does overlapping of responsibilities apply if a child falls from this?
The short answer, yes. we all PCBUs that are working together, owners of land, council bringing in contractors to make the playground, we all share responsibility to ensure that the structure and everything that is set up around there is correct. So if there were to be an accident, the investigation would then look at how our communication has been between the shared contractors, the owners of the land, the council in this instance, and that would show where responsibility lies and if there was any lack of communication or proper process for installation and the regulations around those playground items.
Okay.
So it's not just the trust, it's us liable for falls.
As with the Health and Safety at Work Act, everyone that is involved in a project has a shared responsibility for that project's completion.
Chair, can I ask my second question?
Absolutely, go for it.
Page 15, this is where the operator struck the gas pipe. There is a, we've done a wire investigation, and then it talks about a work safe investigation. If those are two separate things, I'm assuming that they are, might there come consequences from that report to come?
That can be true. The 5Y investigation is the Higgins, who were the contractor, dealing with the project that was the team that hit the gas pipe. WorkSafe were notified. It was a notifiable incident that happened. WorkSafe were notified, but they have not started an investigation. So they have a process of looking at what has happened and if it warrants further investigation from a WorkSafe perspective. At this point, the Health and Safety Coordinator at Higgins has not informed me that WorkSafe are going to investigate. So from the draft that I've received, that's where it stopped, and I'm waiting to hear back from Higgins on the completion of their investigation, which of course, from when this happened to now has, I think their time has been a bit delayed in confirming the report back to me. Okay.
Okay. Robert, you got a question? Yeah, Robert.
Oh, okay. Kia ora, Tania. I have to try and say this in Māori because if I just, kei te mihi aroa ki a koe. Me tō te kaitiaki ki o tātou ngā hapuri o tō tātou whānau ngā tangata. Engari ngā kōrero wānanga ki a mātou kei raro te korowai o tō tātou hapuri, Hora Whenua District Council. E pāna ki te mahi uaua ki a koe, ki te whakamana tō tātou hapuri kei raro te korowai. Yes, I just really want to say thank you. Just being able to, I remembered the first time when we met you, and some of the questions that we were asking as councillors, and I just want to say thank you very much for the read and also the information, and the detail of the information, and I just want to congratulate you for some of the things that you're having to deal with in terms of people's perceptions of how they should be treating people, and so I just want to lift you up in terms of your mai and the things that you're responsible for, and and I congratulate you for the things that the report that you've sent out to us as councillors. Kia ora tata.
Thank you, Robert.
Mm.
Are there any other questions or comments for Tanya? No? Thank you, Tanya. Can I have a mover for the recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Thank you, Todd. Any further discussion on the recommendations? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Right, now just quickly adjourn for 10 minutes. According to my computer, it says 14:38. So if we can stretch our legs for 10 minutes and be back by 14:48 would be appreciated. Thank you, team.
Okay. Gonna have a cup of tea.
Is Preston's back at work fully now, Brian? Oh, sorry. Can I just get this, Brian? It's just Nikki. Hi, Nikki. Hey, a couple of things. Yeah.
No, we're still going. We're just having a break. I think still must have needed a comfort stop. Oh, right.
Right, let's reconvene this meeting and move to the next item on the agenda, which is our project update.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take those reports as read, and maybe if I go through each report individually and ask the members if there are any questions. So the first one would be Tokomaru Water Supply. No? Yep.
Sorry, just a comment, David, more than anything. The way that report's done with highlighting in red all the new stuff was really, really good, mate. Really appreciate it. That's all I had to say, to be honest with you.
Even I understand it now. I think Councillor Ketu had a question.
Oh, thank you. Robert, did you have a question?
He's muted.
There we go.
Ah.
Is that better?
That's better, yep.
All right. Just wasn't a question. It was just was like a sort of update in terms of the. And I saw we're talking about the conditions for the Tokomaru wastewater.
Talking about Tokomaru water at the moment, Robert.
Yes. Oh, okay then. Oh well, I don't have a question about that part. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's all right. All good. So we'll go on to Tokomaru wastewater now, Robert.
Oh yes. I just had a question about where have we got up to in terms of the conditions, and I see I really enjoyed that the read about the being able to work alongside the hapu and have their meetings with the different iwi that are involved. I think that's a huge improvement of some of the things that we've been able to do, compared to our past. And that, I just want to say that, that's a real good step in the right direction for what we're trying to do. Just a question around the conditions. Is there any, I know that Ngāti Whakatere have been having different discussions with Horizons and with some of our people. Is there any updates on where that is at the moment there, David?
Yeah, so look, highlighted on page 23 of the reports, there's an indication there that the draft conditions, revised draft conditions, have been circulated to the submitters. The aim there is to actually get an agreement on what the conditions may be from all of the submitters before we actually then have to go to a hearing. So it's indicated there that 9 of the 15 submitters have agreed to the draft conditions. 1 hasn't accepted them. 2 we haven't had any response back at all, and 3 we're in current discussions with. So what that means with the 3 is we think we can actually get them to agree on either a revised set of conditions or some tweaking. The challenge for us now, given that we're at this point, is pushed out the point where we're going to get an agreement on the conditions until mid-2020, when we thought we might have had them agreed to. I think it was about late February, early March, but we're getting there, Robert.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Ketu.
It's all good. Thank you.
Sorry. Happy to go on to the Foxton Beach stormwater consent.
Thank you. Keep going. Yep, Foxton Beach. Oh, pretty good.
Councillor Tutupua.
Yeah, sorry, I had a question on the item that Robert was just talking about. On the bottom of page 26, there's a timeline which takes this project out to June 2024. And then costs involved on the bottom of page 24. Is that right? 26 and 24. Yep. Doesn't seem like a lot considering the time frame and what's involved. Is that? Am I struggling to reconcile, or it's fine?
No. No, you're actually, you raise a good point. So there's essentially two separate projects here. One is for the short-term consent on the existing wastewater treatment plant. And essentially the bulk of the cost that's highlighted on 24 is for that part of the program. There is a component part around the investigation associated with the long-term solution. What we haven't got is the cost of the long-term solution, because we actually haven't identified what it will be at this stage. So once we work through with the Tokomaru Wastewater Working Party, we'll identify what the preferred option is going forward, and then we'll have a cost associated with that, which will then have to be incorporated into the next LTP. At the same time, though, I have asked the consultant, Good Earth Matters, just to see how we can expedite that process, because it is out quite a long time. And remembering that we have got some tagged funding through the Ministry for the Environment. It's the not freshwater fund. It's a fund that essentially administered through the Horizons Regional Council that is tagged for the second part of the project, which is the long-term solution. The first part of it was purchasing the land, which we have done, but there are some time constraints around the long-term solution and allowing us to get that funding that's been allocated for that. So we're working on that at the moment just to see if we can accelerate that, but that's all dependent on a good working relationship with the working party that we have in place.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Another
So just moving on to the Foxton Beach stormwater consent.
Yep. Any questions on that? Right, David?
Thank you, and thank you, David Clapperton, for your reply to my query. It's page 28, the red font identifying about some discharge, the E. coli and the zinc from the Linkwater Avenue catchment. And David, thank you for the details you supplied me with. But I guess just the bigger question itself, which is just the severity or otherwise of that discharge. It doesn't actually address the effects, if any, and the concerns, if any, we should have in the interim about the quality and quantity of the discharge, the E. coli and zinc.
Yep. So we've essentially done the first cut of some testing that we needed to do, and the purpose behind that was to identify were there elements in there that we then had to consider around to identify whether there was any mitigation steps that we had to undertake before we actually proceeded with a full application. The identification of the E. coli and the zinc in there means that we have to go and do some further testing to identify the source of where that is coming from. I don't, and the reply that I gave back to you is that we are checking the records for any historic hazardous sites in the area, or whether there's any records of hazardous substance, and that's obviously in relation to the zinc. So there's a little bit of work that we need to do to identify source, and if it's source that is not directly council related, i.e. it's not the stormwater itself, we'd obviously be working with landowners or other parties to address on how that might be mitigated. The component part around the E. coli, again, we're looking at doing some further testing to ensure that we understand the context of the first test that we undertook, but also to identify the source. And that's the key thing that we need to go through at the moment. In terms of risks, obviously having those components or those elements in the stormwater is a risk in itself, but the work that we're now having to do is to try and identify a source to mitigate that risk.
At the top of page 29, where it talks about the cost of the project, does that include the new wetland at Holborn Reserve? And if not, is this something the Foxton Beach freeholding account funds could assist with?
You're not allowed to ask difficult questions of me. The first part of that is that no, it doesn't include the Holborn Reserve, because that Holborn Reserve is a sort of a standalone project in itself. But the stormwater component, the sort of the wetlands component, the potential pathways and things like that is captured in a holistic design of what that might look like going forward. Actually, can I just, I don't want to put you wrong there, so can I come back to you with an answer to that question, Pity? Look, the second part of it, the reason why it's deemed as a sort of separate stormwater project is remembering that the stormwater is an activity that's a rate that's charged across the district, not in separate communities. So in this case here, it's the same process that we would go, or the same funding mechanism that we would go through for stormwater, whether it was in Levin, Foxton, Shannon, Tokomaru. So that's why it's actually deemed as a district project rather than a district funded project rather than a project that's just funded out of the beach.
Any further questions on that? Oh, Joe?
But this,
sorry.
can I, oh, sorry. Maybe
No, keep going.
But like, a new wetland is obviously gonna, you know, it's not just about stormwater, but it's protecting that environment and the Ramsar site too. Well, that's how I see it. And that's of significance, not just for us locally, but nationally. And I think it's something that that local community would be quite proud of. So the freeholding account, well, I'm not saying it should all, you know, sole fund that, but just a contribution wouldn't go amiss.
Oh, look, sorry if I've misled you. Any work that's done through the Holborn Reserve, which is part of the reserves enhancement funding that's the Foxton Community Board is working with our team on. Anything that's in the Holborn Reserve, that's actually funded through the Foxton Beach freeholding account. But remembering the stormwater catchment in Foxton is not just that goes through the Holborn Reserve. There's actually other exit points, including Darvick Street, Robbie Street, and Hartley Streets. So that's where we've separated those component parts out to have them as part of a, you know, that overall sort of stormwater strategy. But the work that might be done in Holborn Reserve, that's certainly funded through the Foxton Beach freeholding account.
Joe, did you have a question?
Yes, I did, and thank you. And look, I do appreciate the red highlighted bits. And on page 28, it talks about the interim ecological effects assessment and that work that's ongoing there. And of course, I think you can hear the elected members the concern for what has been identified beyond that Linklater Ave catchment. I'm just wondering if the investigations program that you're referring to and noting that this will be implemented once site work restrictions are lifted, are those site work restrictions linked, directly related to COVID-19 and level 4 lockdown? And if so, are those activities, those investigations able to be started now we're in level 3?
My understanding is that they have started, Councillor Mason.
More questions on Foxton Beach stormwater? Thank you, David.
North East Levin, any questions?
Just to drop it here, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Now, just a question that I asked at the last farm meeting that we had with, I think it was David. Yeah, I can't remember his name. But concerning the CIA that needs to be undertaken by the Hapu or Ati Takahiku. Is it progressed any further? That CIA?
And not that I'm aware of, Councillor Keto, because largely because of the lockdown. But I'll check that that's actually been now brought back to the piece of work that needs to be done, given that we are able to actually get on the site.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay.
And Levin wastewater discharge.
Hira.
On page 36 and 37, it talks about the planting of pine and natives. That's being done, what's going to be done, and then in the future. I just wondered what the science behind the ratio or how many pines versus natives we plant.
Yep. And maybe I wish the consultant was here on this, but you may recall probably about 12 months ago that I indicated that we had received some funding from the Ministry for the Environment to run a trial of using natives rather than pine. So that trial is allowing us to look at the benefits of the nutrient or nitrate draw off from natives, comparing it to pines. So the work that's being done at the moment is running concurrent assessment of both what the benefit of pine might be, but more importantly, what the benefit of natives might be. Remembering that up until about 12 months ago, it was all pine. We had a harvesting program over the last 12, 18 months, and we're replacing a fair portion of that into natives, but it's part of a trial that we'll be reporting back through to the Ministry of Environment. I'm pretty sure we received about $600,000 for that, which covered an amount of plantings to be undertaken using natives as a means to conduct that trial.
Cool.
Any other questions? Don't see any.
And the last one is the Foxton wastewater discharge. Happy to answer any questions there. Just a comment there, though. There must be sort of a whole lot of people champing at the bit as a result of COVID, and we received some very, very neat photographs yesterday from the team, which includes representatives from Raukawa, the contractors, and our team on site, planning the next, well, not planning, but sort of expediting the next part of the installation of the disposal system out on Matakarapa Island. So very, very heartened with our ability to get on the site and actually do the work that we've always been intending to do. So it's a huge step forward, actually, to get to the point that we have. I'm happy to answer any questions on that one.
Thank you, David. Any questions? No questions. Therefore, if there's no questions, can I have a mover for the recommendation way back?
Happy to move.
Happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, David. Any further discussion on the recommendation? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those against, carried. All right, next item is our 9-month financial report. Go.
This is the normally quarterly report. It's probably the first month where we've actually, the result the deficit is actually higher than the budgeted deficit. Up till now, it's been the other way around. The deficit's been lower than the budgeted deficit. So I'm not sure whether that's a trend that's going to happen to the end of the year because of COVID-19, or whether I suspect it might be. The team made a really good effort to try and anticipate the effects of COVID-19 on our income, especially in the community facilities area. And I think there's a bit more work to do, especially if we have a zero-based fees next year. We might have to do a bit of work on the budgets and so forth. But you also notice that we're tracking fairly closely to both income and expenditure in terms of those graphs on page 51. However, we're not so good in terms of our tracking against our capital expenditure. I suspect that capital expenditure line might flatten out a bit because I don't think much happened through the whole month of April. So I'm looking forward to seeing what COVID-19 has on that particular trajectory of the line on page 52. So I'm happy to take any questions that the councillors may have.
Chairman, I've got a list of a few questions. Is it all right if I take them all together?
Absolutely.
All right. Doug, on the top of page 50, and I think you just touched on the deficit, it should say 34% more, not less, in that little box.
Yeah, I think it struggles, the little message that we've got that's sort of like an algorithm, it struggles to handle the deficit. So yeah, whether it's more or less, it's sort of, it's, I've looked at that myself and sort of wondered whether the wording is quite right.
On page 53, we talk about the swaps, and I have to say it's an area that I always struggle to get my head around, but is there anything that we can do? You're estimating it to be 1.1 million at the end of the year. Is there any actions that you can take on swaps that can help us reduce that deficit?
There is a thing that we call blend and extend. We've already done that at least once so what that means is that we can reduce the interest rate on the swaps, but we extend the period that the swaps relate to. So we've already done that a couple of years ago on the two that are creating a problem right at the moment. And that's about all we can do. We're sort of stuck with what we've got, really. I think the 1.1 might be a bit, it might be a bit optimistic because the interest rates is continuing to drop. They have done throughout April. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens here.
As a general question, Doug, underspends, are they still carried forward?
Sorry, what was that? Sorry?
Underspends on budgets, on projects and that, are they still carried forward to the new financial year?
Yeah, most are, yeah. And that's, that'll be, I don't know whether you haven't actually seen the budgets, Brian, but most other people have seen the budgets for CapEx, and it shows that they carried forward a column within that spreadsheet.
Okay.
Just on that though, is that we are closely looking at the CapEx budget for this year and what we have spent to date, and we are just given the circumstance that we're in, we're asking whether those projects should be proceeding or not, and it's information that I'll be providing back to the council through the mayor in the next couple of days for the councillors to consider. We've had some feedback from the officers on the list of projects that we've asked to consider, but some of those may not be carry forwards if I read what has come back from the officers.
Thank you. Doug, on page 57, you've got increased rentals of 137,000. How come they've increased? Is that because of a delay in property sales, or?
So what page was that?
Page 57.
57.
Increased rentals, 137,000 in your in your comments?
Yeah, that's because of the delay in selling some of the properties. So we actually got some income that we didn't budget for.
And my last,
and I think the Parks and Reserves people have made have reviewed all their leases as well.
okay. And my last question is on the 90-day plus debtors. I know we have written quite a bit off, or we're intending to. Do we still continue to chase these? And if so, what sort of success do we have?
Wayne, can you turn your mic off?
I'm struggling to hear you. You're cutting out a couple of times. Sorry about that.
Sorry. With the 90-day debtors plus, do we still continue to chase those? And if so, what sort of success do we have?
Yeah, well, we continue to chase them. I don't really have a really detailed knowledge of how successful we are. I'd have to get back to you on that. But yeah, we certainly chase them. We have got some plans in place for some of those creditors, debtors rather.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Wayne and then Prihira.
Thank you, Philip. Doug, you're saying that you're anticipating that capital spend graph will flatten off somewhat. Is there going to be a new forecast? I suppose this is you and David. Is that what that work in the next couple of days that we'll receive, David? Is that going to show this year, this current year, or are you talking about the next year?
We're picking.
So we are talking about the current year, and Doug's already had an indication from me on where I think we might land, which is about $4 million less than what we've anticipated there, and we've actually been modelling our capital program on that basis, but we have made some assumptions around the carry forwards as well. So the reporting that Doug has on page 52 is based on budget, but our forecast is it'll be somewhat less than that.
We're picking it's going to be about 21, 22 million, Wayne, by the end of the year.
Prihira? Everyone keeps moving on my tiles.
Oh. I've got like 7 questions, but happy for some of the answers to be provided offline. I'll go through them all really quickly. Okay, so page 54, second bullet point under the notes there, just the CE professional services, what was that? And second one, has that staff shortage for the RMA is that gap been plugged yet? Third question, the 76,000 under the payroll returning in-house, I wondered why that went out in the first place, just curious. And the recruitment agency, that 16,000, I just wondered if that was going to be ongoing or that's just a one-off. Page 57, under the gain of sales property, last report I asked if it was 503,000 then, and I was given the list of the 8 properties that were sold that pertained to, but now it's gone up some. I just wondered what those extra properties we've sold are since. And then page 64, scrolling. Oh, the prior year arrears of 300, that's the last column, 307,000 for rural. I thought that was unusual. I don't recall a figure quite so high in other years gone by, but I could be wrong. And then on page 65, there's no note with regards to that trade waste outstanding. I wondered if you could provide some more information. Thank you. That's everything.
Can I suggest through you, Chair, Mr. Chair, that we take note of those questions and we get the answers. Some of them I don't know, but we actually circulate that to all of the councillors tomorrow or the day after.
Thank you. Took the words right out of my mouth.
Yes, I apologise for not getting those in advance, but you know, your week has just begun and I've had to sort my business.
Yep.
Okay.
Christine? No. Here we go, Christine.
Yep, I had several that Perio had, so that's great that she asked those. Also on page 55, it says that rates revenue is likely to be above budget, and that's because of the water rates that we're getting, extra water rates. But is there any, has it been taken into account about maybe the lack of rates that we may get coming in with this COVID influence, especially as we've just talked about that previously with the rates remissions that we're likely to be doing in this, you know, working with people in the next 2 or 3 months?
That's likely to affect the cash flow. The way accrual accounting works is we show the income as we invoice it. That impact of the COVID-19 is going to have an impact on our debtors balances going up rather than an effect on the income itself. There is a little bit of growth in that rates increase as well, because we set the rate in $1 about May, and sometimes we get a burst of subdivisions and stuff coming through from QV in that May-June period, which pushes the rate income up a bit from what we initially. But the biggest impact is that water by meter live-in. That's the biggest impact on that particular line item.
Okay.
Any other questions? Bernie.
Thanks, Chair. Doug, I just wanted to ask you around the swap things, and you've already indicated that we might be a little optimistic with the 1.1 projection, because if I recall last year, the last 3 months, that increased dramatically. And we've already increased by around the 400,000 mark just in 1 month. So I think you're almost signalling it's not going to be like that. And I just wondered also how that related to the figure on page 59, where we talk about in our non-current liabilities, our derivative financial instruments. Are they the same sort of thing? Because there's some figures in there that don't quite equate to what you're telling me in the on page 53 that I'm struggling to comprehend. And my last question was around the net debt level. I see you're forecasting net debt level to be at 30th of June to be 97. Is that net, I assume? We're still planning to be 106 gross?
Yes.
Okay.
The answer to your first question is is the balance sheet is the derivative there is the full liability, whereas in page 53 it's only the movement in 1 year.
Okay.
So the 1.1 million is the movement in that liability in the current year, which increases that overall liability that you're seeing on page 59.
But that's actually predicted to go down significantly by the 30th of June.
No, that was what we.
That's what we'd hoped it would be.
That's what the LTP said was going to be. That's not a prediction.
All right. So realistically, where do you think we might land at the 30th of June then?
Oh, about 4.5 million probably.
Okay, thank you.
Can I suggest here, the derivatives cause everyone a lot of grief, right? And Doug, is it worth doing a 101 on the accounting treatment once we return to chambers on how the calculation works? Because you've actually got, this is the way I read it, this is the way I understood it, where you've actually got an increase in the write-down, it's predominantly caused because of lower interest rates.
Yeah, that's right.
Therefore, we're actually getting the benefit of the lower interest rates in our P&L, but we're also taking an immediate write-down on if we had to repay that derivative tomorrow. And it's really, really hard to get your head around.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you or potentially our Treasury advisor may want to give us a bit of a scenario on what it actually really means and what is the true liability.
Yeah, we certainly could do that. Yeah, that's right. It's a sort of a funny situation where it's actually good news primarily because our interest rates on all of our loans have come down, but these derivatives only cover about 9 million of that 106. So, you know, it's a predominantly good news as opposed to bad news, but it's just that particular line item goes up every time interest rates go down.
Yeah. Right. Any other questions on the financials? Non-financials? No one's commented on the non-financials. All right. All right, therefore, can I have a mover for the recommendation? I'm having to scroll as fast as I can back up again now. Back on page 47, can I have a mover for the receipt of the financials for the 9 months? Thank you, Christine. Seconded, Joe. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Raise your hand. Those against? Carried. Last item, the Treasury report. Doug again.
Okay, well, it's different times, isn't it? I mean, the whole market worldwide is really reacting quite differently from what normal. I'm trying to scroll down to my report at the moment. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's yeah, the pandemic has really put the cat among the pigeons really worldwide, and interest rates worldwide are coming down. They're predicting it to be worse than the global financial crisis back in 2008. It's having that sort of effect. Our Reserve Bank have not ruled out going into negative interest rates, which will be absolutely unique to New Zealand. You know, something we've never ever been in before. It has affected places like Japan and Europe, but not to us. And some banks, I doubt if banks will go to negative mortgages. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if we do go to negative interest rates. I don't think that the Reserve Bank will. I'd be surprised if they did. However, you know, 0.25% OCR rate, I mean, it's about as low as it can get, really, without going to negative. So it'll be interesting to see what the Reserve Bank does next time it meets. Our cost of funds has dropped to 3.08, as you can see, and right now it's at 3. And I'm picking by the end of June it's going to go below 3 because we've got a short-term $16 million worth of short-term funds renewing in June, and we'll renew that for 6 months, and the interest rate on that is halved from what it was. So we're going to go below 3% in mid-June. So I suppose that's about all I've really got to say, unless someone wants to ask any questions.
Any questions of Doug on this? I actually don't have a question. I have a statement. I'm quite nervous about all these economists trying to predict what's happening. The problem is no one has actually seen this type of event before. So that's what generally economists tend to look at, well, in my opinion, the better ones. They look at where has this occurred before and what's been the economic trend. The problem is at the moment, no one knows. So it's basically hang on to your seats and enjoy the ride or don't enjoy the ride, because I think it's very, as everyone said, it's unprecedented. And when we've got unprecedented times, there's no one person or even group of people can actually predict with any certainty what the final implications are going to be. So we've just got to stay light on our feet and monitor the situation continuously. It's my parting words on this statement. Any further comments?
Just before we go on this particular report, the New Zealand government have started doing what we call quantitative easing. They're effectively buying bonds. What that does is it means that people that were going to buy those bonds have got spare cash, which they can invest somewhere else. So it's as close as you get to printing money. So, but what they've also done is they've also said that they're going to buy local government bonds, which stabilises the local government bond market and ensures that we can still borrow. It's at one stage the banks were getting and the people lending to local government were getting real nervous, and we're going to do what they did in February, March 2008, where you couldn't borrow at all for a couple of months. So the government have seen that, and they've actually done something to make sure that that local government can still borrow on the market. So that's one thing they've done for us.
Any other comments? All right, therefore, can I have a mover for the recommendation, please? I'll move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Sam. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. That concludes our meeting. Thank you for your contribution today, everyone. Chief Executive and staff, and thank you for all the faces we can no longer see on screen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.
Just a remind everyone else that we have got a briefing continuing now. So I think Sue will be arranging for us to go off live, but we'll have